That's good.
Okay, Danny, it's wonderful to have you. I know you're in a very busy tour in China now, and thank you for making time.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for taking time to spend with me, and thank you to everyone for listening.
All right. So as many of you probably know, so Daniel is the head of school for Putney School, and then the school is a very special school and peculiar in many ways. So I'll probably start with Danny introducing a bit about the school.
Okay. Well, we are a boarding school in the United States. We enroll 235 students from around the United States and around the world. And several things make our school unique. Number one, it is situated on a 500-acre farm. So in addition to academic learning, our students are in charge of 40 dairy cows and 25 horses and sheep and chickens and even llamas. In addition to being on a farm, we are part of what's called the progressive education movement. And progressive education means a couple of things. One is that education is really not to enrich just an individual, but to make the world a better place. Two is the idea that when you look at a school of 235 students, you have 235 individuals. And for too long, schools, because it's easier for adults and oftentimes more convenience for adults, have tried to teach those 235 students exactly the same way. But you have different interests than I do, and everyone in your audience has different interests than the person on the box on the screen next to them. And we try really hard to find the individual passions of each student and to provide hands-on, authentic ways for them to engage with their learning so they become more curious, more responsible, and more creative. The last thing that progressive education does that really feels important to me and important to the world is really searching for common good. And so students take part and engage in the community, and they not only learn through books, but by getting their hands dirty with work jobs and leadership roles throughout campus. So learning is real and authentic.
Yeah. Thank you for that overview. I think many of my readers probably know one of my most respected educator that returned from US to China is Wang Gan, and her English name is Iris. And her son actually attended Putney School, and that's my connection with the school and then with Daniel as well. And then therefore this opportunity to for folks to learn about the school. And her, when she first introduced about school, she talked about the cows. I think that's where, that immediately catch people's eyes or ears as, okay, it's a very special school. And it's actually pretty small. When you talk about the 200 something students, that's across the entire high school. It's 4 years, right? So
that's right. We want to know. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so like, are they mixed age, or do you also have like the traditional sort of by grades 9 to 9, 10, 11, 12? Is how are the students' body organized?
Grades 9, 10, 11, and 12, but there's also a huge amount of mixing. So one of my favorite things about Putney is that we're a real community, and everyone knows everyone else's name. We know that when you know the people around you, you feel safe. And when you feel safe, you take risks with your learning. And when you take risks, that's how you learn. But if you don't feel safe, you won't take those risks and you won't learn. And so that's how we really try to maximize learning, is making sure everyone knows each other's name. And then when you come to Putney, even if you're a 10th grader or a 12th grader, in our dining hall, everyone is sitting together or playing on sports teams together, in our farm together, helping take care of those cows, or playing sports together.
Wow. Thank you. Sorry, I realized it's Putney instead of Putney. Sorry for the mispronunciation. And how many adults then?
Yeah. We have a lot of adults. We have over 100 adults who are educators in our school. So we have almost as many adults as we have students.
Wow, that's the highest ratio I ever heard of. So it's like one.
Progressive education is really complicated because it's not about the adults and it's about the students. And when you try to meet each student where they are, you need lots of adults to do that.
Yeah, I remember Iris talked about how her son got interested in physics exactly because one teacher there. And she was sharing that story that was very touching. So, but I think maybe for parents, they will be curious, like, well, how do you sustain the school? Like, if 100 adults, that seems to be a lot. Like, how does that model work? Are they like roaming around the classrooms? Like, can you describe what it feels like?
Well, there's two pieces of that puzzle. One is we're a private school, so families pay tuition. And the second is that for our alumni, the Putney School is the most important educational choice they made in their lives. And we have alumni across the world that are so loyal to the Putney School, and they make donations to the school to ensure that in addition to tuition, we can afford to have really this extraordinary experience for students.
Wow. Okay. So that, I think that links to your trip to China. I heard that you're here to meet some of your alumni. Can you talk a little bit about the school's tie to China?
Yeah, and it's a fascinating ties to China, and from our founder from the very beginning, really. And I mentioned our school is part of the progressive education movement, and the progressive education movement was started by a professor named John Dewey in the United States in the early 1900s. And John Dewey traveled through the United States talking about progressive education, and then he also traveled all over one other country, China, right? So he gave lectures to thousands and thousands of people across China about the importance of an education, not only for the self, but for society. And he was taken by storm in China, and really a major player in Chinese education movements beginning in the early 1900s. And as time progressed, our founder had many connections to China. Her family and her children lived in China for many years. And the Putney School was taking student exchange trips to China very soon after what we call the Second World War in the United States. Starting around 15 years ago, students came to China in incredibly high numbers for us. So we have usual about 20 students from China in a school at any given time. About 5 to 6 students per grade in grade 9, 10, 11, and 12. And they're some of our very best students and our most creative artists and our best athletes. And what is really fun is to be in China this last 10 days and to meet so many of them. And to hear about the incredible success that they're having in business and economics and the arts in China, and how they credit the Putney School with giving them the skills that they need to survive back in Chinese society today.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, thank you for talking about Putney, because actually I'm having a dialogue with Charles Abelman. I don't know if you know him. So he was the head of school for the Chicago experimental school that's founded by John Dewey in 1896, I think. And then John Dewey came to Japan first. He was in Japan for a few months, and then to China. And then his China trip was meant to be a very short one. But because he had so many students back then who were all very established, either educators or bureaucrats, and then so they organized so many talks for him. So ended up staying for 2 years, 1919 to 1921. So it is an incredible piece of history, and thank you for making that connection, because I'm actually having a conversation with Charlie himself, talking about his own experience as well. So you talked about every year there's about 20, every grade has about 5 to 6, so it's about 10% of your student body, huh? Given the total body size.
About 10 to 15% of our students come from China.
I see. And are there also other international students? Like, what's the makeup of the total students?
We do about 20% of our student body is international, so about 40 students in a given year, with about half to 2/3 from China. And then the last third will come from different parts of Asia, Japan, or Korea.
Yeah.
And then really across the world, many countries in Europe, sometimes Mexico or in South America.
Wow. Okay. So you mentioned your trip to China so far, last 10 days, met lots of your alumni. Do you want to share some of the stories that's impressed you?
Oh, it is so fun to hear students talk, right? And clearly that they had an extraordinary academic experience at the Putney School. And so when they went on to college and then grad school, to hear the how the success that they had in their graduate work because of their academic preparation at Putney. But then what they continue to talk about is simply the creativity that they employ in their work on a regular basis, and their ability to manage other people and to be a leader in their communities. We have a student who graduated from the Rhode Island School of Design that is starting his own jewelry business and using entrepreneurial skills to really further his art and a craft that he loves. So combining business and art in that way, and I found that really fascinating. And just simply how much students remember being part of a community where they, on a regular basis, were serving as members of our board of trustees. And we have students who are my bosses, along with our traditional board of trustees. Each year we have 2 students that are elected to the governing board of the school, and many of them talked about their time on the board of trustees and how that helped them understand finance and other business regulations. So that's another example.
Wow. Those are students who are still in school, like
Their students are still in school.
Wow. Okay. Wow. So then for the Chinese students, are they after they finish high school, do most of them stay in the US for college, or do they leave to go to other countries?
Most of our students from Putney will go to college in the United States. Some will remain for grad school, and then a good number return to China to pick up their careers.
Yeah. Interesting. Thank you so much. Do you mind then sharing, because I think that this is a conversation, I think, getting many people very interested, both in the school setup and in your student body, alumni body. So if there are families who are interested in sending their kids to Putney, what are the things that you guys consider, like you're looking for in your potential students?
Right. So the most important thing that students who are interested in coming to the United States from China is that we need students who are extraordinarily curious about learning. And that is really conveyed through an interview with our admissions team that has a chance to speak with each student one-on-one to see if they'll be a good fit for Putney. All students also have to demonstrate English proficiency, and that is usually through what's called the TOEFL exam, which is a standard way to measure a student's English skills. And the reason that we have students take the TOEFL exam is that we want to make sure they'll be successful at the Putney School. Right? And so if a student's English is too limiting, they won't be able to engage fully in our classrooms. But here's the part about Putney that I think says so much about us, is that the best score isn't always the best student. And so last year, we interviewed a student that had a test score in the TOEFL that was extraordinarily good. It was over 100. And we had another student who was still learning English, and his test score was in the 70s, which means that he understands English, can speak some English, but has work to do to be able to read it on a proficient basis. And the student that we accepted was a student with a lower TOEFL score, right? Because that student told us through his interview why learning was so important to him, and the goals that he had for his education that weren't simply about himself, but about the world beyond his own life and his own career. And that excites us. So students that are creative, that are open-minded, that seek balance, that are really good at STEM and the arts, that are really good at history and athletics are the students that we seek to have at Putney. There is a study that came out a couple of years ago about creativity and curiosity in students in kindergarten through grade 12. And the shocking piece is that our students across the world, in the United States and in China, are the most creative in grade 1. And after that, schools make students less curious and less creative year in and year out. So we're turning people into robots who learn because they have to and not because they want to. And the goal of the Putney School in the 4 years that our students are with us is every year they become more creative, more curious, and more responsible. And we're looking for students that have the same goals that we do.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. It's true, because I'm actually in Japan now, and part of my experience in the last from spring to summer is to look at Japanese education, K-12 education. It's also a very interesting part because on the one hand, there's also very impressive progressive schools here. Like those are basically founded around the time when John Dewey visited Japan and China. But the mainstream is becoming very suffocatingly about test prep. So you see those almost competing trends that's ongoing. I think this is not new, but as you said, I think creativity is something, if you ask anybody, even just a random person on the street, people would say that yes, it's important. People would not, deny its importance, but actually by choice or by our practice, it's oftentimes deprioritized. Because that doesn't seem, to be something that can lead you to success, right? Or
Right?
yeah,
Well, sometimes the most important things are the hardest to measure.
indeed. Yeah. So like, can you share something like with our audience? Because I think, maybe starting with progressive education, like what is it? Why is it important? And how do you guys do that in school? Like, as you said, it's very difficult to measure. And how do you measure then?
Well, I think, the ultimate way that you can measure like progressive education is what students achieve. And that's why I think tests can be one piece of the puzzle, right? But we know that the best students don't become the best adults and vice versa, right? So oftentimes the skills that you need to be a successful adult aren't the ones that you need to be successful, like simply in a classroom. So one way that we measure students' passion for learning, and ultimately that's what progressive education is all about, is how you further a student's their learning not for learning's sake, not simply for a badge or an honor, as our fundamental beliefs say, but to make the world a bit of a better place, right? Is what we call project weeks. So twice each year, at the end of our fall and at the end of our spring, instead of a very traditional final exam, students have a 2-week opportunity to pick a multidisciplinary project of their own choosing. And they work with a faculty advisor from scratch to create a project that interests them. And so you might have a student who finds a way to explain the Fibonacci sequence in a shawl that they knit with our knitting teacher, but also working with our mathematics department. One of my favorites last year was a student who redesigned our observatory to maximize the potential of the observatory. And being in Vermont, in a very rural part of the United States, where there are far more stars than people that we can see each night, we have such great learning possibilities in our observatory. And she did the research and drew up plans to help us improve that observatory. We have another student who was interested in history and art, and she researched death records in Los Angeles, California, in the US in the late 1800s to understand the different ways in which people passed on 150 years ago. And then she drew illustrations of some of the more colorful ways that people had expired. And it was just the idea of learning about the late 19th century, the 1800s, and using art to communicate what she had learned is 2 or 3 things that you'll oftentimes do during project weeks, right? So what we're looking for is how students are able to take their own learning and to utilize it to create something that otherwise doesn't exist, right? And to
Yeah.
me, that's the heart of progressive education. And then those projects are assessed by advisors and by teachers, and we have increasingly challenging standards as students move through the 4 years of high school.
Wow. So are those projects through the semester, or it's something they create during the 2 weeks?
They're created during those 2 project weeks, but oftentimes they will continue over several. So students will pick really ambitious projects that no human being could complete in 2 weeks, even though that's all they're working on, right? And so those they'll work with their teachers and say that could be a year-long project, or that could happen over 3 project weeks.
Right. Yeah. I think one thing people might be curious, because I certainly hear a lot of these questions, is about the development of technology, right? Because right now with AI, with ChatGPT, and for example, ChatGPT can write much better than most average writer. With Putney, with progressive education, of course, there's a lot of hands-on, with the cows you have to take care of. Of course, I think there's a very different context, but how do you see the integration of technology with their education experience?
Well, I think it goes right back to what you were describing a little bit earlier about the importance of curiosity and creativity in a student's learning. Artificial intelligence is, I believe, going to be like the invention of the printing press in many different ways. We'll look back on this moment, and the way that we understand the world and society 20 years from now will be radically different. and all of the jobs and all of the career opportunities where the goal is to reduce things to a right answer, those jobs are gone and will be gone because artificial intelligence can do it better and faster and with less errors than humans can do. What's going to be left? I think the jobs are going to be left are the people that can reason and the people that can think outside the box and the people that can collaborate and are leaders. And part of the benefit of our farm is that the students in grade 11 and grade 12, they actually supervise the work crews of students in grades 9 and grades 10 in running the farm each day. So they have to figure out how to motivate and inspire younger students to do their job. And they have to show them what a good job looks like and what to do if a person isn't living up to their potential. That's an incredible amount of responsibility for our 11th and 12th graders, but I like to say that Putney is a 4-year internship in leadership because of all the different opportunities our students have to be genuine leaders, and those jobs are never going to go away. Right? So I think part of what we need to do is to emphasize process simply over outcome, because computers will handle the outcomes quite quickly, but we'll always need people to imagine the next big thing and what's next. And Putney and progressive education do that extraordinarily well. I imagine AI actually having some hugely important roles at our school. We do some of the most ancient arts. We have a blacksmith shop where students are working with a forgery, and we bake bread on a wood-fired oven that students chop the wood and maintain throughout the school day. The fiber arts, knitting by hand and creating clothes by hand are things that many students engage in. On the other hand, we have 3D printers right next to some of those art studios. One of my favorite buildings on campus is called the Reynolds Building, and that's where we combine arts and sciences together. There's hardly any schools that I know, the art building and the science building are in the same location, but we do that on purpose because of the cross-disciplinary things that happen when you combine arts and STEM together. One of my favorite examples is we have our fleet of 3D printers next to a spinning wheel of all things. And we have to be one of the only schools in the United States, if not the world, where spinning wheels coexist with our 3D printers. But earlier this year, there was a student working on one of those spinning wheels, and it broke. A piece broke, and there were a couple of teachers huddling at the spinning wheel, talking about the part, how long it would take to order, and when it would come in, and how it might take a couple of weeks to fix. And there was another student working at a 3D printer down the hall, and he heard that conversation. He ran over, took a look, ran back to his 3D printer, and 5 minutes later had produced the part that fixed the spinning wheel. And the first student was able to continue with her project. Right? And so it's that combination of innovation and tradition where I think our students will always have a leg up. Instead of writing, our students are going to have to think differently about, our teachers are going to have to think differently about how students learn. I imagine 25 years ago when the first graphing calculators came out, teachers of mathematics had to change how students think in math, because it used to be we taught students to think by computation, by memorizing multiplication tables and division tables, but calculators did that. And so math teachers had to come up with new ways to think. Our writing teachers, who for a long time have taught students to think through writing, are going to have to find new ways to do that, because AI can produce the writing, but I imagine we can ask AI to produce 3 different drafts of an essay, and students will have to look at each of those 3 and decide which one is the most accurate use of evidence or makes the most compelling argument. Having students, AI help produce an outline, and students have to turn that outline into an actionable piece of work is another thing that I think could make education better and make kids think even harder than they do now. So there's lots of opportunities with AI. It's scary because it's change, and change is hard. And we've been doing education for too long, for thousands of years. It looked about the same. And we're at one of those moments where change is upon us, and it's scary, but there's also so many opportunities.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I really agree with you, because I think one of the among most of the impressive schools I've visited in Japan is this actually 100-year-old school called, basically direct translation is called Freedom School. And they're very similar. They have a pig farm, and then they raise their pigs, but actually they ended up, the students have to raise them and slaughter them and eat them. So they end up become like part of their longer process. And they have farms, they have rice farms on their field as well. And There are students in high school, I think starting from middle school, actually they take turns in cooking for the entire school every lunch. So the school lunch was actually prepared for the students by the students themselves. And it's very interesting. You see this very intriguing intersection of sort of the ancient art and the frontier, because it's very easy to have the conclusion, oh, those are stuff that's belong to the past, right? So like how to raise a pig, or how to how to take care of a rice paddy, and then how to cook. But actually, for educators, if you run a good school, those are actually very substantive experiences or contexts for the student growth to happen. It's not only about learning academics, it's really learning about interacting with other people, or with nature, or with the producing process. And that process actually remain unchanged, even with a different medium. That's in essence what's interfacing with us. It's a different medium, but the essence is different. So I think having drawn that, and thank you for showing all the examples, like the 3D printer next to the spinning wheel and how that can solve it. I think really demonstrated that, and it does have a very high bar on the educators. I think I'm actually curious, this is more for my own, as you probably know, because we started a school ourselves in Beijing. It's now the 8th year, and I constantly find the most challenging part is actually with the adults. It's not with the students or with the kids, especially with the younger kids. They actually every day come out with fresh ideas. They don't need to be trained to have fresh ideas, but it's actually the adults, the teachers or the parents, that are probably more strongly, clinging to some of the dogma or way to work. And oftentimes they were right, because the society doesn't change as fast as we think. And there are a lot of old things that stay. So I'm curious how, as a head of school, you think about like teacher training, or supporting the development of the adults in your school to enable that kind of learning for students.
Yeah. Well, first, I have enormous empathy for parents, just as you described, because even intellectually, when I think about what I want schools to be, and all the innovations that can occur in schools, and how progressive can our schools be and student-centered can they be, when I look at my own 2 children, it's a lot harder to take risks with your own kids than it is intellectually, right? Because everyone loves their kids, and they want them to thrive, and they want them to succeed. And the more you experiment, the more risk you're taking. And most of us only have 1, 2, or 3 of them, right? So I have a lot of empathy for families in that situation, and how they understand intellectually why innovation is good, but when it comes time to their own kids, sometimes they put on the brakes. And I think the first thing that we can do is to be really aware of that, right? And to acknowledge that there's a tension that exists in what we've just described. And so when our commitment at the Putney School is to be extraordinarily good at what we do, right? So there are many, if we didn't offer a top flight academic program, and our students weren't enrolling in some of the best fit colleges and universities for them in the country, then all the fun things that we get to try to do, we wouldn't have the opportunity to do. Right? So the very first thing that we talk about with our teachers is we have to prepare our students with the skills that they need to succeed, not only at Putney, not only in undergraduate and graduate school and in life, but we have to keep that feedback loop going, right? So we're constantly talking to colleges and universities to make sure that what the Putney School is teaching supports students learning beyond simply Putney. Right? Mm-hmm. And so committing to when a student enrolls at the Putney School, that they will be prepared for the next thing is an important part of what we do. On the other hand, while we're at Putney, do we do it in a way that promotes student learning and simply doesn't turn us into another part of the education factory? One of the things that that I'll talk a lot with teachers is they've done some studies about how much students remember. And if you talk at a student and you stand and lecture in front of a room, it's possible people remember about 1 or 2% of what was shared. That means they forget 98% of it. They don't learn very much. If there are chances for students to watch a video or to listen to a recording, maybe they'll remember 5% of what was shared. Again, not very much. That means 95%, like, they forget, right? If you have to make a presentation or to share a PowerPoint, you or do a project, potentially you remember about 30% of what you learned. And again, it's not very high, but if you teach others, then you're remembering about 70 or 80% of the content or the material, right? So over and over again, we need to put our students in the position of being the teachers, right? Where they are taking what they've learned and what they're passionate about, and sharing with other people. And that's why leadership is so important. We have an alum that was doing a job interview at one of the top financial services firms in the United States. And they asked her about her first job. And she answered, well, it was taking care of the cows at Putney, right? Because she had to supervise a crew of underclassmen in doing that work. And she was hired that afternoon because the firm was so impressed that her work experience began in high school. We don't issue letter grades to students until 11th grade. More than anything else, we want students to focus on learning process and not simply a letter at the top of a paper. When I was in high school a long time ago, I would get a paper back from a teacher, and there would be a B or a C on the top. And I had no idea if I got that grade because my writing wasn't strong, if I wasn't using evidence well, or the teacher was simply in a good or bad mood that day. Right? And I want our students, when they do an assignment, to understand what our goals are for that learning, whether it's collaboration, whether it's use of evidence, what's cross-cultural competency. And we assess students in each of those categories and provide narrative feedback for them like several times a year to focus on their learning and not simply a grade at the top of a paper. So that's another way that we teach teachers, right, to think about education progressively.
Yeah. So do the students receive a set of paper? Like, how does they materialize?
Yeah, so 6 times per year, our teachers write what we consider narrative comments. And you asked before why we have to have so many adults on campus to support our students. And the answer is that each teacher writes a paragraph or two to the student 6 times per year about the standards that are being taught in a class and how each of the students is doing against those standards, where they are close to mastery or where they have more work to do and what they can do to improve.
Wow. Okay. How long is the course? I'm curious. I'm curious. Is it like they get an envelope, a few pages?
Yeah, they get a few pages of comments from their teachers, and it's a huge amount of work and a real commitment on the part of our teachers. But students know that their teachers see them and that they know them, and there's some clarity about what they're doing well and what they have to keep working on. So it becomes about improving your skills and not just about the grade at the top of the paper.
Right. All right. Thank you so much. Well, you did mention a little bit about your own experience. You're getting a B or C. Maybe this is like I'll just take the opportunity to ask you about a bit about yourself. Like, what's your journey? How, because I understand you recently took the head of school role, so it's not it's a new chapter for you as well. Can you share a bit of your journey to this role?
Yeah, this is my 2nd year as the head of school at Putney. Prior to this, I had been the director of a school in a different part of the United States in Colorado. And it was a school with a very similar founding values to the Putney School. More than anything else, we wanted to help turn good students into great adults. And the Putney School really is a leader of that in the United States and in the world. And so I had always said, if the chance to come to Putney would ever come up, then I would jump at it. Because when the Putney School is working, we really are a model for how we can educate students better than we do now. So I went to a large public high school myself a long time ago, and with some of the most talented peers that I've ever met in my entire life. And it was very competitive. And that's what I remember about it was there were so many times where instead of maximizing what we all were learning, we were competing with one another. And there's an expression in America, leaving a lot on the table, right? So that's something that stuck with me to this day, as we had all of this talent. And instead of using it all to come up with amazing, creative, innovative solutions. We were just moving on to the next thing and seeing who could get the best grade or have the best GPA or the highest test score. And I wasn't that aware when I was 16 or 17 or 18, but I was aware enough to know that we could have been doing so much more, and I could have been learning so much more had that been the framework for, had collaboration been the framework, and had communicating and coming together and thinking outside the box been what my school is able to promote, how exciting that would have been for the world. And so I decided, even then, that we could do better. And I wanted to work in places where students were challenged academically, but they also they laughed as hard every day as they thought, because ultimately we're happy when we're laughing really hard and thinking really hard, and in a place where we had to work, and we were responsible for the community, and we learned what would happen when we didn't step up, and where creativity was embraced. At the Putney School, the arts are a foundational component of the school. We have academic art classes during the day, and twice a week in the evenings, we bring in either our teachers or visiting artists from all of the community, who share their passions with our students. And that's when they engage in jewelry making, or continue printmaking. And time and again, our students are taking art classes that simply for the fun and to expand their curiosity and creativity, that they otherwise never would be exposed to. And it becomes the defining moments for many of our students in their Putney careers.
Wow. You mentioned about your two children. How old are they now?
Oh, they are 9 and 7.
Oh, they're pretty
So
young.
they're pretty young, although they're less young than they used to be. I've been noticing lately. They're starting to come up on me. Yeah, they are in first grade and third grade.
How are they? Okay. What kind of school are they going to, if you don't
They're
mind
going to
sharing?
our local public school.
Oh, they
I admire that school a good deal. On Fridays, instead of studying in the classroom, the school is on a 200-acre forest. We're lucky in Vermont to have forest in every direction, and they spend their entire Fridays in outdoor classrooms in the forest, and learning ecology and social science lessons, and practicing art in the natural world. So it's a school that tries to get them outside as much as they possibly can, and I appreciate that an awful lot.
Wow. But because you guys moved from Colorado over there, so it's new for them too.
Yes, it's new for them too, and it was a big move, but they're finding a home for themselves in Vermont. And I think the Forest Fridays and having to engage as a community in a classroom outside of the four walls of a classroom, but to be outside, kind of playing with their peers and learning with their peers, they became really close knit in that environment. And if you ask my kids what was really important for their transition to a new state, it was being outside of nature with their classmates, and they met some really great friends that way.
Wow. Yeah, well, I think I will probably ask a bonus question for our audience because of course, I think many people are listening are parents themselves, and then they might have younger kids too. Like you as an educator, now you have both, you have been you had a school in multiple different schools. What do you take from your job to home as a dad in terms
Oh,
of
it's much easier to educate other people's children than it is your own.
So the answer is the teacher and send their kids over.
Just try to remember to listen to the teacher. That's really important. I have to work really hard at home not to solve my kids' problems for them, right? And for them to take a deep breath, because so many times they'll be sad or they'll be frustrated, and I hate to see my kids sad, and I hate to see them angry or frustrated, and I want to do the problem for them that they can't solve, or I want to pick up the phone and call the teacher or call the principal and say, you've got to fix this for my kids. And because I'm an educator and I recognize that that's what my kids need to do, is they need to learn to advocate for themselves, and to solve those problems themselves, I need to step back. And that's the type of skill we teach every day at Putney, and I need to live that value myself. In the United States, there's an expression called helicopter parenting.
Yes.
And if you are aware, helicopter parents who hover and kind of make sure that their kids don't suffer or experience any problems or challenges in school. And there's also bulldozer parents that we talk about, parents that try to clear the way for their kids, and so there's no adversity ever. And those students will not be successful as the world gets challenging and more challenging and changes, right? And we need to teach our students resilience and to solve their own problems. So one of the things that we talk about, I've been reading about recently, is called Lifeguard parenting, and they talk about lifeguards when there's a lifeguard sees a student struggling in the water. The first thing they do is watch for a while to see if that person can solve the problem themselves and kind of get back to equilibrium themselves. And they're watching, and if that person in the water is still struggling, maybe the lifeguard will jump in the water. But instead of swimming right to the person to swim them back to safety, they watch from 10 or 15 yards away to see if that person can do it, knowing that there's someone who can help them if necessary. And the next step, if that person is still struggling, the lifeguard will swim right up to that person and talk kindly to them and say, "You've got this. Take a deep breath. The shore is right there. Here's how you know how to swim back, and let me remind you to kick your legs and to keep moving in the right direction." And to give the person a chance then to solve their own problem. And then, and only then, after all of those steps, if the person in the water is still struggling, will a lifeguard come with a life preserver and swim the person back to safety. But I think as parents, our tendency is to jump right to that last step first, right? Rather than reminding our kids that they have the skills that they need to solve the problems, or to watch to see if they're solving it on their own. We just want to swim out there and give them the life jacket and bring them back to shore because it's so much easier for us, right?
Yeah.
But so that's what we practice at the Putney School, is giving kids the tools to solve their own problems and to think their way outside of challenging issues to great success. And as a parent, I have to remember to do that myself too.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I like. I never heard of the lifeguard thing. I think people talked a lot about the helicopter and the bulldozer, because that's so, as you said, it's so easy. And then the lifeguard piece, it's very precious. I think. Thank you for sharing that. That reminded me of a very recent experience, because last few months, as I told you, because when we were in Japan, similarly, I guess without knowing that term, because I told my kids, I was like, I'm new to the country, I don't know Japanese, like, so if you get into trouble, you have to figure something out yourself. You don't call me because I can't go. So and luckily Japan is very safe, so like, like it's fine. So like they have multiple times they go into problems, like they don't have enough money to buy a subway ticket. I was like, well, then you have to look around and to find some money. Like I'm not traveling 15 minutes to your station to buy your tickets or talk to someone. Yeah. And then like my kids actually ended up solving it with their very broken Japanese. They begged for 300 yen to buy a ticket and to get home. So, and then very recently too, like, so my daughter, she's 9, her name is Edie, and I enrolled her in a tennis class. And then the tennis teacher always called her Easy. Somehow it was just the wrong name. So Edie complained to me once, like, like she didn't get my name right. So I was thinking, well, maybe I should email the coach or tell her that's a name. But like when I was about to do that, the day when I dropped her off at the tennis court, and Edie went up to her and says, "My name is Edie." So I was like, good.
That's what education is for our kids. And your daughter learned so much by taking that step and not relying on you to solve her problem. So
right.
When I think about what the foundation of the Putney School is, and our arts programs and our academic program to life on the farm, it's all about giving students the skills to solve their own problems. Because if they have that skill, they'll use it again and again, and they'll be more successful in college and more successful as adults.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, yeah, indeed. So thank you again for the lifeguard analogy. I hope our audience or parents can take that to heart. But again, as Danny said, it's very difficult because it's very much against our nature or tendency as parents. If you're a trained lifeguard to a victim or potential victim in the pool, you would have done that because you're professionally trained. But I think the challenging part is when we are parents, our own kids, and then you kind of take off that professional hat, right? So I'll just
That's why I try to take my own advice and rely on the teachers.
Right, exactly. Exactly. In that case, rely on the teachers. Don't be the one that jump in and try to solve the problems. Alrighty, thank you so much. I think we're towards the end of our hour, and I think the last 10 minutes, I want have opportunity for Danny to probably to share a bit more about the school, if there are family who are really inspired or energized by this conversation and want to or want to have their kids apply, how they should prepare, or anything you want to say, or to our audience, hearing about the school story. If you want to take next steps, what would that be?
Yeah, I think the first step is to learn more about the Putney School. We are true to our founding beliefs as a progressive school in the United States, and really that does mean some different things, right? Rather than textbooks that are this thick, and every week kids come home and they're reading the next chapter and trying to figure out prepare for a multiple choice test, and they on a regular basis will. The learning will look a lot like potentially the learning that parents explored. Are they ready to take that leap, right? Are they ready to let their kids take charge of their own learning, and have teachers be coaches and guides, instead of the person in front of the classroom with all the answers? Our founder founded Putney because she couldn't find a good enough school in the country for her own kids. She looked around and couldn't find one that she thought was challenging enough academically. Right? So she had to start a school that would really push kids and their hearts and their brains together. And it ended up looking quite different, right? So I think the first thing to do is to, as a family, are you ready to take that leap and to lose some control to give more control to your own kids? The second part is she wanted to make sure that everyone really did work at the school, right? So in addition to our jobs on the farm, students work in our dining hall, just like the example that you shared from the school in Japan, right? And they work with our facilities team to clean the buildings. And when our school is thriving, it's because students are working their hardest to help school prosper. And you have to be ready for an education that includes that too, right? Because sometimes there'll be an awful lot of calculus homework or a advanced physics homework, and a student has to take a break from that to make sure that the cows are fed or the dishes are washed or windows are cleaned, right? And that's all part of an education, but you have to be ready for it. And the last part too is creativity. It's a lot harder to measure creativity than it is excellence in math or science, for example. But we devote a lot of time to making sure that students' artistic lives are balanced and full. So there are students on campus who help raise our sheep, and they shear the sheep and they turn that wool with our chemistry teacher into yarn, and then they're knitting their own shawls. Right, so they're moving through the process of a sheep to shawl program, at the Putney School, but that takes time, right? And it's not always the most efficient way to move through your day. And so as a parent and as a student, you have to ask yourselves, am I ready for an education like that? That is more interested in the process than it is particular products. And if you are visiting our website, which is putneyschool.org in the United States, and make contact with us. And we have an amazing international program director who's been doing this for 34 years. And she is like a second parent to all of our international students who come to the United States to study. And seeing her with our alums in China right now, where they are so excited to see Libby, and Libby is so excited to see them. Parents know that their kids will never be safer than they are at the Putney School with Libby. By getting a chance to meet her and to talk to her, and to come visit campus if you can. Those are all the next steps that you want to take if you're interested in exploring this kind of education. Putney School does not happen to you, right? The students who come to Putney, they really get to shape their education. And I think that's the first conversation that you want to have as a family. Is that the right step for us?
Well, thank you. Is there a timeline folks should be aware of?
Our applications generally happen in the winter and the springtime. So the beginning in December is when you reach out to express interest to schedule an interview with our admissions office to prepare for the English proficiency tests. It's in the late winter is when applications are due. And then we issue acceptances to students who will enroll in the springtime for the following fall. So we're getting close to the time that you begin to really look at this in earnest, and whether you can take a virtual tour or ever come visit the United States to take a real tour. We love to have you. We'd love to meet you either virtually or in person and start the Putney journey together.
Thank you. All right. Okay, thank you so much for your time, Danny. And then I think you both what you shared about the school, about your own story, about parenting.
Parenting is the hardest thing that I've ever done, but oftentimes when I think about progressive education, I think of what John Dewey would say. It helps me get through it.
Right, no, indeed, indeed. And then it was very interesting. People are interested. So when John Dewey was on his tour to Asia, there was a book that's recently published about his letters back to his daughter. So shared his, but his daughter was already adult by then. But I think when John Dewey left, he's 60. But still, it's very interesting how, as a kind of a father, daughter, and educator kind of conversation happened in the same book, which is very neatly kind of meeting or merging as what we discussed. Alrighty, wonderful. Thank you so much again, Danny. And I hope our audience found it informative and interesting and absolutely valuable as well. And then so I think Danny already shared a bit of what's next steps. If you're interested, I think the easiest is to go up to the website, and we'll probably leave contact as well in our livecast room. So if there are folks interested, there will be channels to reach the school. Alrighty, okay, wonderful. Thank you again, Danny.
It's so nice to spend time with you all.
All right, thanks. Okay.